Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today I'd like to answer one of your questions. In your recent comments, one of you, my dear subscribers, wrote, Dr. Brovkin, can you comment about Rabotino Breakthrough? So this is the answer to the question. And in a more general context, what is going on with the update on the war, specifically in the context of Rabotino Breakthrough. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a small town on the front line in the south of Russia, or Ukraine if you want. In recent weeks, after very heavy fighting, the Ukrainians have taken that town, which some of them claim is the first line of Russian defense. Now, in fact, some of the media sources say that Ukrainians have broken through the first line of defense. There are 3 of them. And therefore, there's a kind of upbeat mood in some Western sources covering the war, saying Ukraine is winning. President Zelensky himself has been saying, hard and slow, but the advance proceeds. And most Western media repeat this same narrative, which is that the Ukrainians are advancing. They're advancing slowly, but they are advancing, which is, of course, very important to sustain the credibility of the offensive and the enormous military support and billions of dollars that are going through the channels, and now a new tranche is being discussed at the Congress, etc. So it's very important for them to sustain the idea that Ukraine is winning. Slowly but surely, they are overtaking Russian defense positions. The plan, as I discussed in previous video, is still the same, and that is to break through to Melitopol, which is a south town in Donbass on the Sea of Azov, and that would mean to break the land bridge that Russians have established with Crimea. The plan is to cut it off, to push the Russians out of Donbass, and then we'll be able to blow up the Crimean bridge and surround Crimea, and then they hope the Russians would abandon Crimea just as they had abandoned Kherson, because it supposedly would be unsustainable, undefensible. So that's the plan, and that's what they're doing. To what extent this is working out, and to what extent this can be done. Now, the British advisors, and there's a picture recently of the British commander of British General Staff together with the Ukrainian commander Zaluzhny. They're all kind of hugging each other, and they claim it is feasible, it is doable, they're going to do it soon and break through. Now, so to define their task, they define victory as breaking through to the Sea of Azov. Now, my question is whether that actually would signify victory. Because if they actually do break through to the Sea of Azov, then they would be surrounded on both sides. They will be in the north, the Russians will be in the rest of Donbass, and in the south, they will be in Crimea. And that way, they would be able to bombard this bridge that they would establish incessantly until they give up. In order to really solidify this breakthrough, if it ever happens, they would need to conquer all of Donbass. And that seems to be highly unlikely. If they haven't been able to do it in the, let's see, in the short term from June when the offensive has begun, they have advanced only to the first line of Russian defense, which is about 8 to 10 kilometers. And these was the ones that were not certified. Only now the Ukrainian forces are just reaching the first line of defense. Now, I'm not a military specialist, but if you listen, and you can easily find online on YouTube Scott Ritter, who has been American military observer who has been following very attentively all the military side of the conflict. He says it's impossible, simply because even if they break through the first line of defense, they will be in the trap of the second line of defense, and the Russians would lure them into this second line and then all hell will break loose with the incessant bombardment of Ukrainian forces. But as I said, even if they do break through to Azov, this will hardly be able to sustain it because they will be surrounded by the very geography. Okay, then there's another narrative which is mostly Russian, but some other independent military observers who basically say that Ukrainian offensive has fizzled out and stopped, and it cannot be maintained in terms of resources and manpower that had already been sacrificed. Now, some estimates are that about 180, 90 motor vehicles and tanks have been destroyed in the last 2 months since June, at the beginning of the offensive. The number of human casualties is extremely hard to estimate because it's all military secret, especially on the Ukrainian and on the Russian side. But military specialists say that these are enormous casualties, that Ukrainians suffer more because they are the advancing side. The advancing side is always losing more men simply because they're advancing. They have to break through defensive positions. So in the long term, this is unsustainable, and that I can already feel in the analysts who follow the mood in Ukraine. And increasingly, despite very tough measures to control the media space and the ban on all photographs from the front and all kinds of measures Ukrainian government has taken, you could see from the independent reports that there's a certain war fatigue that is setting in Ukraine. And that the number of casualties are so high that people are beginning to ask question, what for? Is it worth it to sacrifice more tens of thousands of Ukrainian young men's lives in order to what? Obtain land access to Azov Sea. What good would it do to Ukraine? Not much. To obtain control over Donbass, which is populated by people who obviously don't want to be a part of Ukraine. And if we're talking about conquering Crimea, that is clearly impossible because Russian bases have been there for ages, even during the times of independent Ukraine, and they are simply not going to be able to do that. So in that case, what is Putin's strategy? And again, I'm not a military specialist. I cannot vouch for what I say, but as an observer, I could see several things. Number one, the Russian strategy, which is Putin's strategy, basically is to build up the arms production, which now has reached unbelievable levels that had never been seen before. Some estimates are that Russian war production now exceeds all production by NATO countries, and by far, in terms of missiles and shells and tanks and everything else. Number one. And number two, building up the volunteer army. And there's a tremendous campaign going on in Russia to enlist volunteers, and actually, if the information is correct, tens of thousands are lining up and signing up every month, so building up production, building our army. Then the new laws have been prepared to crush those who don't want to be mobilized. In case mobilization happens, it will be now a criminal offense in Russia to avoid mobilization orders. That's number three. And number four is that what is fighting on the front is about, let's say, 300 plus 300, about 600 or 700 soldiers are now at the Russian side of the front. But Russian army is 1 million plus. And that is all the conscript army, which is officially not participating in the special military operation. These men are held in reserve in case Poland joins into the war, or in case, as Carlson Tucker said, American president would decide to send in the Americans to join in the fray. Now, to combat all of those, just in case, Russia is holding 1 million men in reserve. And that means that Putin's strategy appears to be, logically speaking, to exhaust the enemy in this kind of a relatively low intensity warfare, because there's not much going on in other sections of the front, 1,000 kilometers wide, but there's heavy fighting in one place, and then in Bakhmut in another place, and then in the Kharkov Oblast area in the north is the third place. That's it. Everything else is stable. So it seems like his strategy is to exhaust the enemy and then begin Russian offensive. Now, what would be the best result for the Ukrainian society and for the Russian is the conclusion of peace. And here's what it seems to be are three possibilities that are crystallizing that could happen. Number one is Russia gets maximum, which is all it wants after the collapse of Ukraine, and that's control over Ukraine. But from the words of Putin that I heard in recent interviews and things, he does not want to control West Ukraine, because West Ukraine inside Russia would be like a Trojan horse that you don't want to have. So they will be independent, but certainly on very strict terms, that is not being a member of NATO. Number two, a program minimum, which is only Donbass will return to Russia, and the rest, plus of course Kherson, because it's officially proclaimed as Russian territory, and then the rest of Ukraine independent, and again only under the condition of its neutrality and no membership in any military blocs. And number three is in between the two, which is that Russia will get Donbass and Kherson, plus Kharkov and Odessa, which many Russians, millions of Russians, consider Russian territory populated by Russians that has not been a member of original Ukraine, formed before Lenin gave all these territories to Ukraine. And again, no part of Ukraine ever joins NATO or any military bloc directed against Russia. So these are the contours of what might happen, and we shall see at what speed the events will develop in this direction. Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe and ask your questions. I'll do my best to answer. Bye.